1 Samuel chapter 13. Saul became king and he ruled over Israel. Saul chose 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with him in Michmash and in the hills of Bethel, and 1,000 with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. Saul sent the rest of the people away, every man to his home. Jonathan killed the Philistine governor in Geba, and the Philistines heard of this. Saul then blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." And the news spread throughout Israel. Saul has killed the Philistine governor, and now Israel is at war with them. And they called everyone out to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines gathered to fight with Israel, 3,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and troops as many as the sand on the seashore. They went up and encamped in Michmash, east of Bethaven. When the people of Israel saw that they were in trouble, they hid themselves in caves, in holes, in rocks, in tombs, and in cisterns, or crossed the fords of the Jordan River to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul was still at Gilgal, and all the people with him were afraid. He waited 7 days, the time appointed by Saul. But Samuel did not arrive at Gilgal, and the people were beginning to disperse. So Saul said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the peace offerings as well." Saul then offered the burnt offering. He had just finished offering when Samuel arrived. Saul went to greet Samuel, who threw him this question, "What have you done?" Saul answered him, "When I saw the people beginning to disperse because of your failure to arrive on time, and considering that the Philistines have mustered their forces at Michmash, I said to myself, the Philistines will launch their attack against me before I get Yahweh's blessings, and so I decided to offer the burnt offerings." Samuel told Saul, "You have done a foolish thing by not obeying the command of Yahweh your God, who would have established your rule forever. But now your kingship will not last, for Yahweh has chosen someone else more pleasing to him, whom he has appointed to be commander over his people, because you have not done what Yahweh commanded you." Samuel then left Gilgal and went on his way. Meanwhile, the people went up from Gilgal with Saul to join the warriors at Gibeah of Benjamin. Saul reviewed his men, numbering some 600. While Saul and his son Jonathan stayed in Geba of Benjamin with the men, the Philistines pitched camp in Michmash. Raiders came out of the Philistine camp in 3 companies. One company turned to Ophrah, to the land of Shual, the other to Bethoron, and the third to the border overlooking the valley of Seboim toward the wilderness. The Israelites had no smith anywhere in their land, for the Philistines did not want the Hebrews to make swords or spears, to have their plowshare, mattock, axe, or sickle sharpened. The Israelites had to go down to the Philistines, who would charge them 2/3 of a shekel for plowshares and mattocks, and 1/3 of a shekel for sharpening axes and setting goads. And so, on the day of battle, the Israelites had neither sword nor spear. Only Saul and Jonathan had them. Yet the Philistine raiders had moved on toward the pass of Michmash. 1 Samuel chapter 14. The same day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his armor-bearer, "Let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." Jonathan did not inform his father about this. Saul was at that time on the outskirts of Gibeah at Migron under the pomegranate tree with about 600 men. Also with Saul was Ahijah, son of Ahitub, brother of Ichabod, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, priest of Yahweh in Shiloh. And he was wearing the ephod to consult Yahweh. Not even the soldiers knew that Jonathan had left them. The pass through which Jonathan planned to go to reach the Philistine garrison was flanked on each side by a rocky crag, one called Boses, the other Sene. One of the crags was to the north in the direction of Michmash, the other to the south in the direction of Geba. Jonathan said to his shield bearer, "Let us go over to the garrison of those uncircumcised fellows. It may be that Yahweh will help us, for it is as easy for Yahweh to give victory with a few men as with many." His armor bearer replied, "Do whatever you think best. As for me, I follow and obey you." Jonathan said, "Look, we will draw near and show ourselves to those men. When they see us, if they cry out, 'Stay there, and we shall go over to you,' we shall stay quiet and go no further. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' we shall go up, because that will be a sign that Yahweh has delivered them into our hands." When the two were seen by the Philistines, the latter exclaimed, "Look, Hebrews coming out of their hiding places." And they challenged Jonathan and his shield bearer, "Come over here, and we will teach you a lesson." Jonathan then told his armor bearer, "Follow me, for Yahweh has delivered them into the hands of Israel." Then Jonathan crawled up on his hands and feet, his armor bearer following him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer finished them off. In that first slaying by Jonathan and his armor bearer, about 20 men lost their lives within half a furlong. Panic struck in the camp and in the countryside, sowing terror in the garrison. Even the band of raiders was disturbed. It was like an earthquake, and they were filled with a holy terror. Saul's watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin saw the commotion in the camp. The Philistines were running and scattering in all directions. Saul then told those who were around him, "Count our men and see who is missing." And they discovered that Jonathan and his armor bearer were not with them. Saul ordered Ahijah, "Bring the ephod," because Ahijah had taken it with him. But while Saul was talking to the priest, the confusion in the Philistine camp increased. Saul then told the priest, "Withdraw your hand." And after consulting his men, he went with them to the camp. They saw that there was complete confusion, and the soldiers were striking each other with their swords. Moreover, the Hebrews who had joined the Philistines turned around and sided with the Israelites under Saul and Jonathan. When the Israelites who were hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they came out from hiding and pursued them. And so Yahweh delivered Israel that day in a battle that extended beyond Beth Horon. On that day, however, as the Israelites became weary, Saul took an oath, putting the people under the ban. "Cursed be the man who takes food before evening, before I have avenged myself on my enemies." Because of this oath, no one dared touch any food. As the men wandered into the forest, they saw honey on the ground, and although it was freely dipping from the honeycomb, no one tasted it for fear of the oath. But Jonathan, who had not heard of this oath, dipped the tip of the rod he was holding in the honeycomb and put it to his lips, and he felt fortified. At this, someone said, "Though the people were tired, your father bound them with this oath. Cursed be the man who takes food today." Then Jonathan said, "My father did you wrong. See how I have been fortified by tasting a little of this honey. If only our men had freely eaten today of the spoil of their enemies, the Philistines would have suffered an even greater defeat." Nevertheless, they pursued the Philistines all the way from Michmash to Aijalon. Then the people, extremely worn out, rushed to the spoils and took sheep, oxen, and calves, and after they had slaughtered them on the ground, they ate over the blood. Saul was told that the people were sinning against Yahweh by eating over the blood. He said, "You have acted like pagan people. Roll a large stone here in front of me." Then he added, "Go around and tell the people to bring their oxen or their sheep to me. Slaughter them here and eat, but do not offend Yahweh by eating over the blood." So that night everyone brought what he had of the spoils and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to Yahweh, the first he ever built to him. Then Saul said, "Let us pursue and spoil the Philistines by night and finish them off by morning without leaving a single man alive." To this the people replied, "Do what you think is best." But the priest said, "We must consult Yahweh." So Saul asked, "Shall I attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hands of Israel?" But God did not answer him that day. Saul said, "Call all the army officers here. We must find out who is responsible for the sin that has been committed today. I swear before Yahweh, who has just saved Israel, that he shall surely die, even if it happens to be my son Jonathan." No one answered Saul. He told the people, "Go, stand on one side, while I stand my son Jonathan, stand on the other." The people answered, "Do what you think is good." Then Saul said, "O Yahweh, God of Israel, why did you not answer your servant this time? If it is my son Jonathan or I who have sinned, O Yahweh, God of Israel, let the casting of lots show Urim. If it is your people Israel who have sinned, let it show Thummim." The Lord cast pointed to Jonathan and Saul, not to the people. Saul then said, "Cast the lot between me and my son Jonathan." The Lord singled out Jonathan. Saul then said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." And Jonathan replied, "All I did was to taste a little honey from the tip of the rod that I dipped in the honeycomb. Am I to die for this?" Saul said, "May God strike me down if you are not put to death, Jonathan." But the people protested, "By no means shall Jonathan die. He who has brought this resounding victory to Israel, not at all. By Yahweh's life, not one hair of his head will fall, for he has acted today with God's assistance." So the people rescued Jonathan from certain death. After that, Saul ceased to pursue the Philistines, and they withdrew to their own country. When Saul felt secure as king of Israel, he began to fight against all his surrounding enemies: Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines, routing his enemies wherever he went. He crushed the Amalekites and delivered Israel out of the hands of those who were plundering them. The sons of Saul were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. His two daughters were Merab, his firstborn, and Michal. His wife was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. The general of his army was Abner, son of Ner, who was Saul's uncle. Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. Saul struggled fiercely against the Philistines all the days of his life. So whenever he discovered a strong and brave man, he recruited him into his service. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Samuel told Saul, Yahweh sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. So now listen to what he has to say to you. I will punish Amalek for having stood in the way of the Israelites when they were leaving Egypt. Now attack Amalek and destroy completely all that he has. Do not spare them, man, woman, infant or suckling, ox or sheep, camel or ass. Saul called his men to Telarim and reviewed 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men from Judah. He went to the city of Amalek, set an ambush in the valley, and proceeded to warn the Kenites. Leave the Amalekites. I do not want to punish you with them, since you showed kindness to the people of Israel when they left Egypt. After the Kenites had left, Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah to Shur, east of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, but put the rest of the people to the sword. Saul and his men spared Agag and the best of the sheep, oxen, fatlings, and lambs, and everything that was good, but destroyed all that was worthless. Then Yahweh spoke to Samuel, I feel sorry that I made Saul king because he has turned his back on me and has not kept my command. Samuel was troubled and cried to Yahweh all night. Early next morning, he went looking for Saul, but was told that Saul had set off for Carmel to erect a monument to himself and then had gone on his way to Gilgal. When finally they met, Saul greeted Samuel. May Yahweh bless you, and added, I have done what Yahweh told me to do. Samuel then asked him, Why do I still hear the bleating of sheep and the lowing of oxen? Saul replied, We have brought them from the Amalekites because the people spared the best sheep and oxen to sacrifice to Yahweh your God, but the rest have been destroyed. Samuel then told Saul, Enough. Let me tell you what Yahweh said to me last night. Saul replied, Please tell me. So Samuel went on and said, Though you had no confidence in yourself, you became chief of the tribes of Israel. For Yahweh wanted to anoint you king over Israel. Then he sent you with this command, Go, completely crush the Amalekite offenders, engaging them in battle until they are destroyed. Why then did you not obey the voice of Yahweh, but instead swooped down on the spoil, doing what was evil in his sight? To this Saul replied, I have obeyed the voice of Yahweh and have carried out the mission for which he sent me. I have captured Agag, king of Amalek, and completely destroyed the Amalekites. If my men spared the best sheep and oxen from among those to be destroyed, it was in order to sacrifice them to Yahweh your God in Gilgal. Samuel then said, Does Yahweh take as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obedience to his command? Obedience is better than sacrifice, and submission better than the fat of rams. Rebellion is like the sin of divination, and stubbornness like holding on to idols. Since you have rejected the word of Yahweh, he too has rejected you as king. Saul then told Samuel, I have sinned in disobeying Yahweh's command and your instructions. I feared my own men and obeyed them instead. Please forgive my sin and return with me so I may worship Yahweh. Samuel refused and said, I will not return with you, because you have rejected the word of Yahweh, and he has rejected you as king of Israel. As Samuel turned to leave, Saul held on to the end of his robe, which tore. Then Samuel said to Saul, Yahweh has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day and has given it to someone better than you. The glory of Israel does not change or repent as man does. Saul then said, I have sinned, but please honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel. Return with me so that I may worship Yahweh your God. And Samuel returned with Saul, who went to worship Yahweh. Samuel said, Bring me Agag, king of the Amalekites. Agag stood before him with a cheerful face, thinking that he was now out of danger. But Samuel told him, As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. Then Samuel dealt a mortal blow to Agag before Yahweh in Gilgal. Samuel left for Ramah, while Saul went home to Gibeah, Saul's hometown. From that day, Samuel did not see Saul again until he died. But he was grieving over Saul, because Yahweh regretted having made him king over Israel. 1 Samuel chapter 16. Yahweh asked Samuel, How long will you be grieving over Saul, whom I have rejected as king of Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have chosen my king from among his sons. Samuel asked, How can I go? If Saul hears of this, he will kill me. Yahweh replied, Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to Yahweh. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will let you know what to do next. You shall anoint for me the one I point out to you. Samuel did what Yahweh commanded and left for Bethlehem. When he appeared, the elders of the city came to him asking fearfully, Do you bring us peace? Samuel replied, I come in peace. I am here to sacrifice to Yahweh. Cleanse yourselves and join me in the sacrifice. He also had Jesse and his sons cleansed and invited them to the sacrifice. As they came, Samuel looked at Eliab, the older, and thought, This must be Yahweh's anointed. But Yahweh told Samuel, Do not judge by his looks or his stature, for I have rejected him. Yahweh does not judge as man judges. Humans see with the eyes, Yahweh sees the heart. Jesse called his son Abinadab and presented him to Samuel, who said, Yahweh has not chosen this one either. Jesse presented Shammah, and Samuel said, Nor has Yahweh chosen this one. Jesse presented 7 of his sons to Samuel, who said, Yahweh has chosen none of them. But are all your sons here? Jesse replied, There is still the youngest, tending the flock just now. Samuel said to him, Send for him and bring him to me. We shall not sit down to eat until he arrives. So Jesse sent for his youngest son and brought him to Samuel. He was a handsome lad with a ruddy complexion and beautiful eyes. And Yahweh spoke, Go, anoint him, for he is the one. Samuel then took the horn of oil and anointed him in his brother's presence. From that day onwards, Yahweh's Spirit took hold of David. Then Samuel left for Ramah. The Spirit of Yahweh had left Saul, and an evil spirit sent by Yahweh tormented him. Saul's servants said to him, We know that an evil spirit sent by God is tormenting you. If you so wish, your servants who stand before you will look for someone who can play the lyre. So when the evil spirit from God comes over you, he will play and you will feel better. So Saul answered them, Get someone who can play the lyre well. One of them said, A son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, plays very well. He is moreover a courageous man, intelligent and pleasant to talk with, and Yahweh is with him. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse and asked for his son David, who tended the sheep. Jesse loaded an ass with bread, a wineskin, and a kid, and had David take all these to Saul. David then left and entered Saul's service. Saul grew very fond of David and made him his armor-bearer. Then he sent word to Jesse, saying, Let David remain in my service, for I am very pleased with him. So, whenever the evil spirit from God overpowered Saul, David would play on the lyre, and Saul would feel better, for the evil spirit would leave him. 1 Samuel chapter 17. The Philistines prepared their forces for battle and gathered together at Soko, a territory of Judah. They encamped between Soko and Aseka in Ephes-dammim. Saul and the Israelites meantime assembled and pitched camp in the valley of Elah, ready for their encounter with the Philistines. The Philistines took their position on one hill, while the Israelites took theirs on another hill, with a valley separating the two forces. Then a champion named Goliath came out from the Philistine camp. He was from Gath and was about 3 meters tall. He wore a helmet of bronze and a coat covered with bronze scales. His armor weighed 60 kilos. He had bronze greaves strapped on his legs and a bronze spear slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was the size of a weaver's rod. Its head weighed 7 kilos. His shield bearer went before him. He stood in front of the Israelite ranks and shouted, Why have you come out in battle array? I am a Philistine, and you are Saul's men. Choose a man from among yourselves who can challenge me. If he fights better and kills me, we shall be subject to you. But if I overpower him and kill him, you shall be subject to us. The Philistine added, This is my challenge to the Israelite troops this day. Give me a man who can fight with me alone. When they heard this challenge of the Philistine, Saul and his men were afraid and greatly terrified. Now David was the son of Jesse, an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, who had 8 sons. Jesse was already old during Saul's reign, but he had sent men to the army. 3 of his eldest sons had joined Saul in battle: Eliab the firstborn, Abinadab the second, and Shammah the third. David was Jesse's youngest, and while the 3 eldest followed Saul, he would alternate his goings and comings to the army with the care of his father's flock in Bethlehem. Every morning and again in the evening, the Philistine would come out to throw his challenge. This he did for 40 days. One day, Jesse told his son David, "Bring a measure of this roasted grain and these 10 loaves to your brothers, and take these 10 cheeses to the field officer. Find out how your brothers are, and bring me back some token from them." David's brothers and the field officer were with Saul and the Israelites in the valley of Elah, facing the Philistines. David woke up early the next morning and entrusted the sheep to a shepherd. Taking the food along with him, he left in obedience to Jesse's command and arrived at the encampment just when the army was leaving for the battleground, shouting out their battle cry. Israel and the Philistine drew up facing one another. On seeing this, David entrusted his load to the baggage keeper and rushed to the ranks to greet his brothers. While he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion of Gath, came up from the ranks of the Philistines and shouted out the same challenge as before, this time reaching David's ears. When the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him terrified, and one of them said, "Have you seen this man who comes up challenging Israel? Whoever succeeds in killing him will be richly rewarded by the king. He will give him his daughter in marriage and set his family free of every contribution." David asked those who were around him, "What will be the reward for the person who kills this Philistine and lifts this disgrace from Israel? And who is this uncircumcised Philistine who defies the armies of the living God?" The people answered him in the same way, "This will be the reward of whoever kills him." When he saw David talking to the men, his eldest brother Eliab was angry and said, "Why did you come here? With whom did you leave those few sheep in the desert? I know you are an insolent fellow. You have come only to see the battle." David asked, "What have I done this time? I was merely asking something." Leaving his brother, David turned to another man and asked him the same question, and the people answered him the same way as before. David's remarks spread around and reached Saul, who asked for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one be discouraged on account of this Philistine, for your servant will engage him in battle." Saul told David, "You cannot fight with this Philistine, for you are still young, whereas this man has been a warrior from his youth." But David said, "When I was tending my father's sheep, whenever a lion or bear came to snatch a lamb from the flock, I would run after it, kill it, and rescue the victim from its mouth. If it attacked me, I would hold it by its beard and slay it. I have killed lions and bears, and will do the same with this uncircumcised Philistine, for he has defied the armies of the living God." David continued, "Yahweh, who delivered me from the paws of lions and bears, will deliver me from the hands of the Philistine." Saul then told David, "Go, and may Yahweh be with you." Saul fitted his armor on David, put a bronze helmet on his head, clothed him with a coat of mail. David secured his sword over the armor, but could not walk because it was his first time. So he said to Saul, "I cannot move with all these trappings on me, because I am not accustomed to wearing them." David got rid of all this armor, took his staff, picked up 5 smooth stones from the brook, and dropped them inside his shepherd's bag. And with his sling in hand, he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine moved forward, closing in on David, his shield bearer in front of him. When he saw that David was only a lad. He was of fresh complexion and handsome. He despised him and said, "Am I a dog that you should approach me with a stick?" Cursing David by his gods, he continued, "Come, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." David answered the Philistine, "You have come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you with Yahweh, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Yahweh will deliver you this day into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. I will give the corpses of the Philistine army today to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth shall know that there is a God of Israel. All the people gathered here shall know that Yahweh saves not by sword or spear. The battle belongs to Yahweh, and He will deliver you into our hands." No sooner had the Philistine moved to attack him than David rushed to the battleground. Putting his hand into his bag, he took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on the forehead. It penetrated his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, felling him without using a sword. He rushed forward, stood over him, took the Philistine's sword, and slew him by cutting off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they scattered in all directions. The men of Israel and Judah raised the battle cry and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. Wounded Philistines fell on the way from Sharaim to Gath and Ekron. Returning from their pursuit of the Philistines, the Israelites plundered their camp. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but left the armor in his tent. When Saul saw David come out to oppose the Philistine, he asked his general Abner, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner answered, "I swear, O king, I do not know." The king said, "Ask whose son that lad is." So when David returned after killing the Philistine, Abner took him to Saul. Saul asked David, who stood before him holding the head of the Philistine, "Whose son are you, young man?" David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." 1 Samuel chapter 18. When David had finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan felt a deep affection for David and began to love him as himself. Saul kept David with him from that day and did not allow him to return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made an agreement with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan, taking off the cloak he was wearing, gave it to David. He also gave him his own armor, sword, bow, and belt. Wherever Saul sent David, he went and succeeded. For this reason, Saul put David in charge of the soldiers, a move which pleased Saul's men and his officers as well. When they arrived after David had slain the Philistine, the women came out from the cities of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing with timbrels and musical instruments. They were merrily singing this song, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very displeased with this song and said, "They have given tens of thousands to David, but to me only thousands. By now he has everything but the kingdom." From then on, Saul became very distrustful of David. The following day, an evil spirit from God seized Saul, causing him to rave in his house. David then played on the lyre as he used to do, while Saul had his spear in hand. Then Saul pointed it at David, thinking, "I will nail David to the wall." But David escaped on 2 occasions. Saul saw that Yahweh was with David and had left him, and he was afraid. So he removed David from his presence by making him chief of 1,000 men. David went ahead of his troops and was successful each time because Yahweh was with him. The more successful David was, the more afraid Saul became. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their expeditions. Saul said to David, "You know my eldest daughter Merab. I will give her to you as your wife. Be brave and fight Yahweh's battles." For Saul thought, "Let the Philistines strike him instead of myself." David answered Saul, "Who am I, and what is my father's family in Israel, that I should be the king's son-in-law?" Yet when it was time for Merab to be married to David, she was given instead to Adriel the Mecholathite. Now Saul's daughter Michal fell in love with David. When this came to Saul's knowledge, he was very pleased, for he thought, "I shall promise her to him, and it will be a snare to him. The Philistines will kill him." So Saul said to David a second time, "You shall now be my son-in-law." Then he commanded his servants to talk to David privately and say, "The king and all his servants like you. You should become the king's son-in-law." Saul's servants repeated these words to David, who replied, "Do you think it is easy to become the king's son-in-law, poor and unknown as I am?" When Saul's servants repeated to the king what David had said, Saul ordered them to tell David, "The king wants no marriage gift other than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." For Saul wanted David to fall into the hands of the Philistines. Saul's servants told this to David, and it seemed to him that he could easily become the king's son-in-law. David and his men set out and killed 200 Philistines, and they brought the king the foreskins so that David could become the king's son-in-law. So Saul had to give his daughter Michal to David to become his wife. Saul feared David, for he knew that Yahweh was with him. But Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. Saul feared David more and more, and was his enemy until the end. Whenever the Philistine chiefs engaged David in battle, he succeeded more than any of Saul's officers in earning great fame for himself. 1 Samuel chapter 19. Saul told his son Jonathan and his servants of his intention to kill David. But Jonathan, who liked David very much, said to David, "My father Saul wants to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning and hide yourself in a secret place. I will go out and keep my father company in the countryside where you are, and I will speak to him about you. If you find out something, I will let you know." Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul and said, "Let not the king sin against his servant David, for he has not sinned against you. On the contrary, What he has done has benefited you. He risked his life in killing the Philistine, and Yahweh brought about a great victory for Israel. You yourself saw this and greatly rejoiced. Why then sin against innocent blood and kill David without cause?" Saul heeded Jonathan's plea and swore, "As Yahweh lives, he shall not be put to death." So Jonathan called David and told him all these things. He then brought him to Saul, and David was back in Saul's service as before. War broke out again, and David set out to fight the Philistines. David crushed them so badly that they had to flee. Then an evil spirit from Yahweh seized Saul as he sat in his house holding his spear while David was playing on the lyre. Saul made an attempt to pin David to the wall with his spear. David, however, dodged the blow, and the spear hit the wall instead. David fled and escaped. That night, Saul sent messengers to David's house to keep an eye on him, as he intended to kill him the following morning. But David's wife Michal told him, "If you do not run for your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through the window, allowing him to escape. Next, Michal took the household idol, laid it in the bed, and put a bundle of goat's hair on its head. She then covered this with a blanket. When Saul sent messengers to capture David, Michal told them, "He is sick." Saul sent messengers back to David and said, "Bring him up to me on his bed for me to kill him." But when the messengers entered, they saw the household idol in the bed with the bundle of goat's hair at its head. Saul therefore asked Michal, "Why did you deceive me and allow my enemy to escape?" Michal answered, "He threatened to kill me if I did not let him go." David had fled and was in safety. He went to Samuel at Ramah and related all that Saul had done to him. He and Samuel then went to live at Naioth. Saul was told that David stayed at Naioth in Ramah, so he sent messengers to capture David. But when they saw the band of prophets prophesying, signifying that they had fallen into a trance, with Samuel leading them, the Spirit of Yahweh came upon them and made them prophesy. Upon hearing what happened, Saul sent more messengers who also began to prophesy. Saul sent more the third time, and the same thing happened. Then Saul himself went to Ramah and arrived at the deep well in Seku. He asked, "Where can I find Samuel and David?" The people answered, "They are at Naioth in Ramah." So Saul proceeded to Naioth in Ramah, but the Spirit of Yahweh came upon him as well, and he walked along prophesying until he reached the entrance of Naioth in Ramah. He took off his clothes and prophesied in Samuel's presence. Then he fell down naked, remaining in that position all day and all night. Hence sprang the saying, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" 1 Samuel chapter 20. David fled from Naioth in Ramah and went to Jonathan to ask him, "What have I done? What am I guilty of? What sin have I committed against your father that he wants to kill me?" Jonathan, however, assured him, "No, you shall not die. My father does nothing small or great without informing me. Why should he hide this from me? No, this cannot be." But David replied, Your father knows very well that you are pleased with me, so he thinks it is better not to tell you and grieve you. But I swear there is but one step between death and me." Then Jonathan told David, "What can I do for you?" David answered, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and I should be dining with the king. But let me hide myself in the open country until the evening of the third day. If your father looks for me, say to him, 'David asked me to let him go over to Bethlehem, because they have their yearly sacrifice there with the entire family.' If he says, 'Good,' then I am in no danger. But if he gets angry, then you can be certain that he wants to harm me. Do this for me according to our agreement. But if I am guilty, kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father to be killed?" Jonathan answered, "Nonsense! If I knew that my father wanted to harm you, would I not warn you?" David then asked him, "Who will tell me if your father answers you angrily?" Jonathan said, "Come, let us go into the open country." So they both left for the open country. Then Jonathan said to David, "Yahweh, the God of Israel, be our witness. About this time tomorrow or the following day, I shall be sounding out my father. If he is well disposed toward you, I shall send you word. But if my father intends to do you harm, may Yahweh punish me if I do not warn you, that you may escape safely. Surely Yahweh will be with you, as he has been with my father. If I live, always be kind to me. But if I die, never cut off your friendship with my family, even when Yahweh takes vengeance on David's enemies and wipes them out from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the family of David, and he made David swear once more because of the affection he felt for him, for he loved David as himself. Then Jonathan said, "Tomorrow is the new moon. Your absence will be noticed, because your seat will be vacant. On the third day it will be noticed all the more. So go and hide yourself where you hid before, and stay beside the heap of stones there. I will shoot 3 arrows near the stones, as if I were aiming at a target. I will then send a lad with this instruction, 'Go, look for the arrows.' If I say to the lad, 'The arrows are on this side, pick them up,' then you may come out, for I swear you are not in danger. But if I say to the lad, 'The arrows are beyond you,' leave, for Yahweh is sending you away. But as to our covenant, Yahweh is our witness forever." So David hid himself in the open country. On the day of the new moon, the king came to dine. He took his usual place on the seat against the wall, while Jonathan sat facing him and Abner was beside him. David's seat remained vacant. Saul did not say anything on that day, thinking that something may have happened and David was unclean. On the second day of the new moon, David's seat was still vacant, and Saul asked his son Jonathan, "Why has the son of Jesse not come to table yesterday and today?" Jonathan answered, "David asked leave to go over to Bethlehem, for he said, 'Our family is offering a sacrifice in the city, and my brothers insisted that I be present. So please allow me to go and visit my brothers.' This is why he has not come to the king's table." Saul became very angry at Jonathan and told him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, Do I not know that you prefer the son of Jesse to your shame and your mother's shame? For as long as the son of Jesse lives, neither you nor your kingdom can stand. Send for him and bring him to me, for he is doomed to die." Then Jonathan asked his father, "Why should he die? What has he done?" At this, Saul pointed his spear at him, and Jonathan understood that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan rose angrily from the table and did not eat that second day of the month, grieving for David because of what his father said against him. The next morning, Jonathan went to the open country with a young man, according to what he and David had agreed on. He told the lad, "Run, fetch the arrows." While the lad was running, Jonathan shot an arrow that flew beyond the lad. When the lad reached the spot where Jonathan had shot the arrow, Jonathan called after him and said, "The arrow is beyond you. Run quickly and do not waste time." The lad picked up the arrow and ran back to his master. The lad knew nothing of Jonathan and David's agreement. After that, Jonathan gave his weapons to the lad and commanded him to take them to the city. When the lad had gone, David came out from behind the mound and lay on the ground. The two embraced each other and wept with one another until David was through. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have made an oath to one another in Yahweh's name when we said, 'Yahweh shall be between you and me, and between your descendants and mine forever.'" 1 Samuel chapter 21. David went on his way, while Jonathan returned home. David came to Nob, to the priest Ahimelech. Ahimelech came to meet him and asked, trembling, "Why are you alone?" David replied, "The king sent me on a mission and strictly ordered me not to tell anyone about it. Because of this, I have decided on a place where I shall meet my men. What do you have here? Can you give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you have?" The priest answered David, "I do not have ordinary bread at hand. There is only holy bread. If your men have had no relations with women, they may eat." David answered, "Indeed, we have abstained from women these days since I set out. The young men remained sexually clean, though it was an ordinary expedition, and today they are clean." So the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no other bread. This was the bread of presence, which had been replaced by fresh bread on the day it was removed. Yet one of Saul's men was there on that day. He was Doeg, the Edomite, and Saul's chief shepherd. David asked Ahimelech, "Do you have a spear or a sword with you?" "I did not take my arms with me, because the king's order was urgent." The priest replied, "I have here, wrapped in a piece of cloth behind the ephod, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah. You can take this if you wish, for I have nothing else here." David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." That same day, David fled far from Saul. He went to Achish, king of Gath. Achish's servants remarked, "O king, is this not David?" Did the people not dance on his account and sing, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? David understood these words and began to fear Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be mad, making marks on the doors of the gate as he let his spittle run down his beard. At this, Achish told his servants, "Look, it is a madman. Why did you bring him to me? Am I short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow to act foolishly in my presence? Will this fellow come into my house?" 1 Samuel chapter 22. David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam, where his brothers and his father's family came down to him. Then those who had problems or debts or were embittered joined him there. Thus he became their chief. He had with him about 400 men. From there, David went to Mizpeh in Moab and asked the king of Moab to let his father and mother stay with him until he found out what God would do for him. So David left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed there as long as David remained in the refuge. The prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the refuge. Go to the land of Judah." So David left and entered the forest of Hereth. Saul heard that David and his men had been seen. Saul was in Gibeah at the time, sitting under the tamarisk tree on the high place, his spear in hand, while his servants were standing by. Saul addressed them, "Listen, men of Benjamin. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields or vineyards? Will he make each of you a commander over 1,000 or over 100 men, that you should be conspiring against me? Why then did no one tell me that my son made an agreement with the son of Jesse? No one among you had mercy on me and told me that my own son had stirred up my servant to conspire against me, as is the case today." At this, Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with the officers of Saul, spoke up. "I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, in Nob. Ahimelech consulted Yahweh for him, provided him with food, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine as well." On hearing this, the king sent for Ahimelech the priest, son of Ahitub, and all his family who were priests in Nob. They all came to the king. Then Saul said, "Listen, son of Ahitub." He replied, "Yes, my lord." Saul asked him, "Why did you conspire with the son of Jesse, giving him food and a sword and consulting Yahweh for him, so that he could rebel against me, as is the case today?" Ahimelech answered the king, "Who among all your servants is as faithful as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and honored in your house? Is today the first time that I have consulted Yahweh for him? By no means. Let not the king accuse me or any member of my family of such a thing, for I knew nothing at all about the entire matter." But the king said, "You and your entire family shall die, Ahimelech." And the king at once commanded the guards who were standing by, "Turn and kill the priests of Yahweh for having assisted David." They knew very well that David was a fugitive, but they did not tell me anything at all. The king's servants, however, refused to lift their hands against the priests of Yahweh. And so the king turned to Doeg and commanded him, "Come and stab the priests." And so Doeg the Edomite drew near and stabbed the priests. On that day he killed 85 persons who were wearing the linen ephod. After that Saul put Nob, the city of priests, to the sword, killing men and women, children and infants, oxen, asses and sheep. A son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to David. Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of Yahweh. David said to him, "I knew that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul. So I am responsible for the death of all your family. Stay with me, and do not be afraid, for he who wants to kill you must also kill me. You will be safe with me." 1 Samuel chapter 23. David received a report that the Philistines were attacking Keilah and plundering the threshing floors. He therefore consulted Yahweh and asked, "Shall I go and fight with these Philistines?" The answer was, "Go and attack the Philistines and rescue Keilah." But David's men protested and said, "Look, here in Judah we are in danger and afraid. What then if we go to Keilah and face the Philistines?" So David consulted Yahweh again and got this answer, "Go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your hands." David went with his men to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, seizing their cattle and causing a great slaughter among them, and he rescued the inhabitants of the place. When Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, he took along the ephod. When Saul was told that David had come to Keilah, he said, "God has delivered him into my hands, for he has shut himself in by entering a city with gates and bars." He then called on all the people to go down to Keilah and engage David and his men in battle. When David found out that Saul meant to harm him, he told the priest Abiathar to bring the ephod. Then he consulted Yahweh. "O Yahweh, God of Israel, listen to your servant, for I have heard that Saul plans to come to Keilah and destroy the city on my account. Will Saul come down as I heard? O Yahweh, God of Israel, speak to your servant." Yahweh answered, "He will come down." Then David asked, "Will the lords of Keilah hand me and my men over to Saul?" Yahweh answered, "They will hand you over to him." So David set out with his 600 men. He left Keilah and wandered from one place to another. When Saul was informed that David had escaped from Keilah, he abandoned the expedition. Meanwhile, David stayed in the strongholds in the hill country of the desert of Ziph. Saul, however, kept on searching for him, but God did not deliver David into his hands. David knew that Saul had come out to kill him, and he remained at Horesh in the desert of Ziph. Saul's son Jonathan went to him and encouraged him in God's name with these words, "Have no fear, my father Saul will not harm you. Even my father Saul knows that you shall be king over Israel, and that I shall be second to you." The two made an agreement before Yahweh in Horesh, after which David remained there while Jonathan returned home. Some of the Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah and told him, David is hiding among us in the refuges of Horesh on the hill of Hakilah, south of Jeshimon. Come down therefore, O king, whenever it may please you, and we shall deliver him into your hands. Saul replied, May Yahweh bless you, for you have had mercy on me. Go and make sure where he has been, and who has seen him there, for I am told that he is very cunning. Check all the places where he may be hiding, and come back to me, and I will go with you. If he is in the region, I will search him out among all the clans of Judah. So they went off to Ziph ahead of Saul. At this time, David and his men were in the desert of Maon, in the valley south of Jeshimon. When David learned that Saul and his men were looking for him, he went down to a ravine in the desert of Maon. Saul heard of this and pursued David into the desert of Maon. Saul moved along one side of the mountain, and David along the other. David was hurrying to escape from Saul, who with his forces was closing in on him and his men. It was then that a messenger came to Saul and said, Come quickly, because the Philistines have invaded the land. Saul then left off pursuing David and went to face the Philistines. This is how the place came to be called the Ravine of Parting. 1 Samuel chapter 24. David then went up from there and stayed in the hiding places at En-Gedi. When Saul returned from his pursuit of the Philistines, he was told that David was in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 picked men from all Israel and went in search of David and his men to the east of the wild goat cracks. When he came to the sheepfolds along the way, he entered a cave to relieve himself. Now David and his men were far back in the cave. David's men said to him, This is the day which Yahweh spoke of. Look, I will deliver your enemy into your hands, and you will do with him as you see fit. So David moved up and stealthily cut off an end of Saul's robe. But afterward, David regretted having cut off an end of Saul's robe, and he said to his men, Let me not lay my hands on my master, for he is Yahweh's anointed. With these words, David restrained his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. Saul then left the cave and went on his way. Then David himself stepped out of the cave and called after Saul, My master, the king. When Saul looked back, David knelt and then bowed to the ground in homage and asked him, Why do you listen to those who say that I want to harm you? Look, today you have seen that Yahweh delivered you into my hands in the cave, and I was told to kill you, but I held myself back and I said, I will not lift my hands against my master, who is Yahweh's anointed. My father, look at this end of your robe which I am holding. I cut off the end of your robe, but did not kill you. Now you may know that I mean you no harm or treason. I have done you no wrong, and yet you are hunting me down to kill me. May Yahweh be judge between you and me, and may he exact justice from you in my case, but I shall do you no harm. As the saying goes, From the wicked comes wickedness. As for me, my hand shall not harm you. But who is it you are after, O King of Israel? Are you pursuing a dead dog, a flea? May Yahweh be judge between you and me. May he see and uphold my cause and deliver me from your hands. After David had spoken these words, Saul asked, Is that your voice, my son David? He wept aloud and said to David, You are right, and I am wrong, for you have repaid with kindness the harm I have inflicted on you. This day you have shown your righteousness to me by not taking my life when Yahweh put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go unharmed? May Yahweh reward you for what you have done for me today. Now I know for certain that you shall reign, and the kingdom of Israel will be firm in your hand. Now swear to me by Yahweh that you will not wipe out my descendants and erase the name of my family. David swore to this before Saul, after which Saul went home, while David and his men went up to the hiding place. 1 Samuel chapter 25. The day Samuel died, all Israel gathered together to mourn him, after which they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David went down to the desert of Maon. A very rich man, owner of 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, lived there and had his farm in Carmel. This man was named Nabal. His wife Abigail. The woman was intelligent and beautiful, but the man himself, a Calebite, was rough and ill-mannered. He was at the time shearing his sheep in Carmel. When David heard in the desert that Nabal was shearing his sheep, he sent 10 young men to the farm with this instruction: Go to Nabal in Carmel and greet him for me in these words: Peace be with you and your family. Peace be with all that is yours. I hear that you have shearers with you. Now, when your shepherds were with us, we did not harm them. Neither did they miss anything while they were in Carmel. Ask your servants, and they will tell. So be kind to my servants, since we come on a festive day. Please give them and your son David whatever you can. When David's young men arrived, they delivered this message to Nabal in David's name and then waited. But Nabal answered David's servants, Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? Many nowadays are the servants who run away from their masters. Must I take my bread, my wine, my meat, which I have slaughtered for my shearers, and give it to men who come from I don't know where? At this, David's young men left and returned to him, reporting everything Nabal had said. David then said to his men, Let every man strap on his sword. And every one of them, including David, strapped on his sword. About 400 men followed David, while 200 remained with the baggage. One of Nabal's servants told Abigail, his wife, David sent messengers from the desert to greet our master, but he shouted at them, Yet these men were very good to us. We suffered no harm and did not miss anything while we were living among them during our stay in the open country. They were like a wall for us night and day while we were tending the sheep in their midst. Now think over what you should do. for our master and his entire family are surely doomed to die, but he is so wicked no one can speak to him." Abigail hurriedly prepared 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 measures of roasted grain, 100 cakes of pressed raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on asses. Then she said to her servants, "Go on ahead, and I shall follow you." But she told her husband nothing of this. As she rode down the mountain on her ass, David and his men were coming down from the other direction. When she met them, David was reflecting, "It was useless guarding all that this fellow has in the desert. Although he lost nothing belonging to him, he has returned me evil for good. May God do so to David, and more if by morning I leave a single male alive among those who belong to him." On seeing David, Abigail quickly dismounted from the ass and threw herself on the ground before him. As she fell at his feet, she said, "My lord, let the blame be on me. Let your handmaid speak to you. Listen to her words. Let not my lord pay attention to this ill-mannered man Nabal, for he is just what his name says. He is a fool. I, your handmaid, did not see the young men whom you sent. Now, my lord, as Yahweh lives and as you live, it is Yahweh who prevents you from shedding blood and avenging yourself. Let your enemies and those who seek to harm my lord become like Nabal. And now let this present which I have brought you, my lord, be given to the young men who follow you, and please forgive me. Yahweh will certainly give you a lasting family, because you are fighting the battles of Yahweh, and no evil shall be found in you as long as you live. Should anyone make an attempt on your life, may the life of my Lord be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of Yahweh your God. May he hurl away the lives of your enemies as from the hollow of a sling." So when Yahweh fulfills his promises and appoints you as commander over Israel, you shall have no reason to grieve or to feel any grief or regret for having unrightfully shed blood or taken revenge yourself. May Yahweh bless you, and you, my Lord, remember your handmaid. David then said to Abigail, "Blessed be Yahweh, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. Blessed be your good judgment, and may you yourself be blessed, for you have prevented me from shedding blood and avenging myself today. For as Yahweh, the God of Israel, lives, he has prevented me from hurting you. If you did not hurry to meet me, not a single male belonging to Nabal would have been alive by morning." David accepted what she had brought him and told her, "Go back home in peace. I have listened to you and granted your request." Abigail went back to Nabal and found him holding a feast in his house. He was joyful and very drunk, so Abigail did not mention anything to him until the following day. When morning came and Nabal had slept it off, the wife spoke to him about all these things. On hearing it, Nabal had a stroke and remained paralyzed. 10 days later, Yahweh let him die. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be Yahweh, who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal and has prevented me from doing wrong. Yahweh himself has made Nabal's wrongdoings fall on his own head." David then sent his servants to Abigail in Carmel to propose marriage to her, saying, David has sent us to you to say that he wants you to be his wife. Rising and bowing to the ground, Abigail answered, May I be as a slave to wash the feet of my Lord's servants. She quickly rose and mounted an ass, and attended by 5 of her servants, she left with David's messengers and became his wife. David also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, making both her and Abigail his wives. Saul, in the meantime, had given Michal, his daughter and David's wife, to Palti, son of Laish, who was from Galim. 1 Samuel chapter 26. Ziphites came to Saul in Gibeah to tell him that David was hiding on the hill of Hakilah, east of Jeshimon. On hearing this, Saul went down with 3,000 picked men of Israel to the desert of Ziph in search of David. He encamped on the hill of Hakilah beside the road east of Jeshimon. When David, who was in the desert, saw that Saul had come after him, he sent out spies who confirmed Saul's arrival. David came to Saul's place of encampment and saw where Saul was resting with Abner, son of Ner, chief of his army. Saul was sleeping in the center, and his men were around him. David then asked Ahimelech the Hittite, and Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and Joab's brother, Who will go down into the camp with me to Saul? Abishai answered, I will go down with you. So that night David and Abishai went into the camp and found Saul sleeping in the center, his spear thrust into the ground at his head, while Abner and the rest of the soldiers were sleeping around him. Abishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hands this day. Let me nail him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I will not repeat it. But David answered Abishai, Do not harm him, for who could harm Yahweh's anointed and not be punished? As Yahweh lives, only Yahweh may strike him. Either he dies on the day appointed, or he is killed in battle. Don't let me harm Yahweh's anointed. Instead, take the spear that is at his head and the water jug, and let us be on our way. So David took the spear and the water jug from near Saul's head, and they left. Nobody saw, nobody knew, nobody woke up. All remained asleep, for a deep sleep from Yahweh had fallen on them. On the opposite slope, David stood at a distance on top of the hill and called out to both Abner, son of Ner, and the soldiers, Why don't you answer, Abner? Abner answered back, Who are you to awaken the king? David said to Abner, Are you not a man who is like you in Israel? Why then did you not closely guard your lord the king? An ordinary man has broken into the camp and made an attempt on the life of the king, your lord. Is this the way you fulfill your duties? You deserve to die because you did not guard your Lord, Yahweh's anointed. Now look for the king's spear and the water jug that were at his head. Saul recognized David's voice and asked, Is that your voice, David, my son? David answered, It is my voice, my lord, O king. Why does my lord pursue me? What have I done? What am I guilty of? Now let my lord the king hear my words. If it is Yahweh who has incited you against me, may an offering appease him. But if men have done so, may they be cursed before Yahweh. For they have made me an exile to this day, and have driven me from my share of the inheritance of Yahweh, as if saying to me, Go and serve other gods. Let not my blood flow to the ground, far from the presence of Yahweh. For the King of Israel has come to seek out a flea as a man hunts a partridge in the mountains. Then Saul said, I have done wrong. Come back, David my son. I will not harm you anymore, since you valued my life this day. I have acted like a fool and have made a great mistake. David answered, I have your spear with me, O king. Let one of your servants come over to fetch it. Yahweh rewards a righteous and loyal man. Today he delivered you into my hands, but I refuse to harm Yahweh's anointed. As I valued your life today, may Yahweh value my life and deliver me from all distress. Finally, Saul told David, Blessed are you, David my son. You shall succeed in everything you do. Then David went his way, and Saul went home. 1 Samuel chapter 27. David thought, Someday I shall die at the hand of Saul. It is better for me to escape to the land of the Philistines, where I shall be beyond his reach, and Saul will get tired of searching for me within the borders of Israel. So David went with his 600 men to Achish, son of Maok, king of Gath. He and his men lived with Achish in Gath. Each one had his family with him, and David had his 2 wives, Ahinoam, Jezreel, and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow. When Saul was informed that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. David said to Achish, If I meet with your approval, let me have a place to live in one of the country towns. Why should your servant live in the royal city with you? That very day, Achish gave David Ziklag, which since then and up to the present time has belonged to the kings of Judah. David lived 1 year and 4 months in the country of the Philistines. David and his men raided the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. All these lived in the land extending from Telaim to Shur and the land of Egypt. David would attack the land, leaving neither man or woman alive, and carrying off their sheep, oxen, asses, camels, and garments. Then he would come back to Achish. Whenever Achish asked, Whom did you raid this time? David would answer, The Negeb of Judah, or the Negeb of the Jerahmeelites, or the Negeb of the Canaanites. David left neither man nor woman alive. For he said, If I brought them to Gath, they could talk against us and say, This is what David did. Such was his practice as long as he lived in the country of the Philistines. Achish trusted David and said to himself, David is now hated by his own people. He shall be my servant forever. 1 Samuel chapter 28. In those days, the Philistines mustered their forces to fight against Israel, and Achish told David, I want you to know that you and your men must join me to fight this battle. David answered, Then you will see for yourself what your servant can do. Achish said to David, I will make you my permanent bodyguard." Now Samuel had died, and when all Israel had mourned for him, they buried him in his own city Ramah. Meanwhile, Saul had driven those who consult spirits of the dead and fortune tellers out of the land. As the Philistines gathered together and encamped in Shunem, Saul also mustered the Israelite forces and encamped in Gilboa. But on seeing the Philistine camp, Saul was afraid and his heart failed him. Saul consulted Yahweh, but Yahweh gave no answer, whether in dreams or by the Urim or through prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, "Find me a woman who consults the spirits of the dead, that I may go and consult her." His servants told him, "There is a medium at Endor." Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and left with 2 men. He arrived at night and said to the woman, "Tell my fortune through a ghost, and call the spirit I shall name." But the woman answered him, "Do you not know that Saul has driven medium and fortune tellers out of the land? Why do you set a trap for me to bring about my death?" But Saul swore to her by Yahweh, "As Yahweh lives, you will not be in trouble for this." Then the woman asked him, "Whom do you want me to call up?" Saul said, "Call up Samuel." When the woman saw Samuel, she screamed and said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king then told her, "Have no fear. What do you see?" The woman said, "I see him rising from the ground. He is a god." Saul asked her, "What does he look like?" She replied, "The one rising is an old man clothed in a mantle." Saul knew that it was Samuel. He knelt and bowed face to the ground in homage. Samuel spoke to Saul, "Why did you disturb me by summoning me up?" Saul answered, "I am in great distress, for the Philistines are waging war against me, and God has abandoned me. He no longer answers me either through prophets or in dreams. Because of this, I have called you to tell me what I should do." Samuel said, "Why do you ask me? If Yahweh has abandoned you and turned against you, Yahweh has done to you what he foretold through me. He has torn the kingdom from your hand and has given it to your neighbor David. Remember that you disobeyed Yahweh by not executing his fierce anger against Amalek. That is why Yahweh has done this to you today. Now Yahweh will deliver Israel together with you into the hands of the Philistines. By tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me, when Yahweh delivers the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground, terrified by what Samuel said. He had no strength left, because he had not eaten anything all that day and night. The woman drew close to Saul, and seeing how frightened he was, said to him, "Look, your maidservant has obeyed you and risked her life doing what you have asked her to do. Now it is your turn to listen to me. Let me give you something to eat, so you may have strength when you go on your way." Saul refused and said, "I will not eat." But on the insistence of his servants and the woman, he agreed, rose from the ground, and sat on the bed. The woman had a fattened calf in the house, which she immediately butchered. She also took some flour, kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread, and set it before Saul and his servants. They then ate and left that night. 1 Samuel chapter 29. Now the Philistines mustered all their forces at Aphek. The Israelites were encamped beside the spring in Jezreel. While the Philistine rulers went ahead of their groups of thousands and hundreds, David and his men were marching at the rear with Achish. The Philistine chiefs asked, "Who are these Hebrews?" Achish replied to the Philistine chiefs, "This is David, servant of Saul, king of Israel. He has been with me for over a year, and since he fled to me up to the present day, I have found no fault in him." But the Philistine chiefs were angered at this and said to him, "Send that man back. Let him return to the place where you assigned him. He must not go down into the battle with us, lest during the battle he turn against us. How better could this fellow regain his master's favor than by bringing him the heads of our men? Is this not the David for whom they danced and sang? Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." So Achish called David and said to him, "As Yahweh lives, you are honest, and I would like you to be with me in the camp. For I have found nothing wrong in you since you came to me up to the present day. But you displease the lords, so it is better for you to leave and go back quietly and do nothing to displease the Philistine lords." David asked Achish, "But what have I done? Have I done anything since I entered your service until the present time that would bar me from joining the fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Achish replied to David, "I myself hold nothing against you, but the Philistine chiefs are determined not to allow you to join us in battle. Now, therefore, get up early tomorrow morning and leave with the soldiers who came with you." So David and his men left early in the morning and returned to the land of the Philistines. The Philistines, in the meantime, went on to Jezreel. 1 Samuel chapter 30. David and his men reached Ziklag on the third day, but the Amalekites had just raided the Negev and Ziklag, storming it and burning it to the ground. They had taken captive the women and all who were in the city, young and old. They killed no one, but carried them off when they left. When they reached the town, David and his men found it burned to the ground, and their wives, sons, and daughters taken captive. Then David and those with him wept aloud until they could weep no more. David's two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, widow of Nabal of Carmel, had also been taken captive. Now David was greatly distressed because the people were talking of stoning him, for they were embittered because of what had happened to their sons and daughters. But David found strength in Yahweh his God. David told Abiathar the priest, son of Ahimelech, to bring him the ephod. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David, who then consulted Yahweh. "Shall I go after these raiders? Can I overtake them?" The answer was, "Go after them, for you shall surely overtake them and recover the captives." David set out with his 600 men, and they reached the brook of Besor. There 200 men stayed behind, for they were too exhausted to cross the brook. And David continued the chase with 400 men. They found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David. They gave him food which he ate and water to drink. They gave him a piece of fig cake and 2 pieces of raisin cake. The Egyptian ate and recovered his strength, for he had been 3 days and 3 nights without eating or drinking. David then questioned him, "To whom do you belong, and where do you come from?" He answered, "I am an Egyptian, slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me because I fell sick 3 days ago. We raided the Negeb of the Kerethites, the territory of Judah, and the Negeb of Caleb, and set the Ziklag on fire." David then asked him, "Will you lead me to this raiding band?" He replied, "Swear to me by God that you will neither kill me nor deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will lead you to this raiding band." So the Egyptian led David to the raiding band, whom they found scattered all over the ground, eating, drinking, dancing and feasting with the spoils they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. David fought them from early morning to the evening of the following day, allowing no one to escape, except 400 young men who mounted their camels and fled. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken and rescued his 2 wives. Nothing and no one was missing, small or great, son or daughter, booty or anything the Amalekites had taken. David brought back everything. He then gathered flocks and herds, and the people drove them before him, saying, "These are David's spoils." David reached the 200 men who had been too tired to follow him and were left behind at the Besor brook. These men came to meet David and those who were with him. David then drew near and greeted them. But the malicious and worthless people among those who had accompanied David said, "Since they did not come with us, we shall not share the booty with them. Let each of them take his wife and children and leave." But David said, "My brothers, you shall not do that after what Yahweh has given us. He has protected us and delivered into our hands the band that raided us. Who would agree to what you have said? The share of those who go down to battle and of those who remain with the baggage shall be the same. They shall share alike. From that day to the present, this has been a statute and custom for Israel." When David arrived in Ziklag, he sent part of the booty to the leaders of Judah, to each of his friends, saying, "This is a gift to you from the booty of Yahweh's enemies, to those in Bethel, in Ramoth Negeb, in Jatir, in Aroer, in Sipmoth, in Eshtemoh, in Rakal, in the Jerahmeelite cities, in the Kenite cities, in Hormah, in Borashan, in Attak, in Hebron, and in all the places where David and his men had stayed." 1 Samuel chapter 31. Now the Philistines fought against the Israelites, who, in their plight, fell mortally wounded on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines surrounded Saul and his sons and killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. The battle raged around Saul, and he was afraid when he saw that the archers had found him. Then Saul commanded his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, lest these uncircumcised men come and stab me themselves, making fun of me." But his armor-bearer did not move, because he was greatly terrified. So Saul drew his own sword and fell upon it. Seeing that Saul was dead, the armor-bearer also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all his men died together on the same day. When the Israelites on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. Then the Philistines came and occupied those cities. The following day, the Philistines came to strip the slain and found Saul and his 3 sons lying dead on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and then sent messengers throughout the Philistine lands to proclaim this good news in the temples of their idols and among the people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth and pinned his body on the wall of Bethshan. When the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their warriors set out, marched through the night, and removed the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Bethshan. They then returned to Jabesh and burnt the bodies there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, after which they fasted for 7 days.